that these are ways that we can think about privacy management when online. So before I get to the gender, trying to make this practical, you might want to think about how are you somebody who has high or low self-consciousness? Are you more concerned with this, offering your information or your own internal thoughts, and do you not think too much about how other people are going to take them, or vice versa, or both? How closely do you monitor your own communication, or are you the type to just let it fly and see what happens? How much concern do you have for what you perceive as appropriate given the context? And so all of that might impact how you sort of decide how to deal with issues of privacy online. And then gender. Gender was another area that I think is really interesting. One of the things that the book doesn't do is differentiate between gender and sex, and you all know it's different. Sex is the biological, and gender is how we perceive folks in light of the biological. So gender is more like masculine and femininity, and sex is male, female, even though there's all these in-betweens. So what they're really talking about is sex here, the biological, because it talks about men and women. And from a particular study, I think this is by Jeffrey Child, the same person who is and the co-author of this particular chapter. He said women were more concerned with blogging privacy management as such use more coded language on their blogs, blogged in ways that limit public information ownership, and were more cautious than men about who was allowed to link to their blog. Men enacted more of a public orientation in the blogging privacy management rules guiding their CMC interactions over all on blogs. These findings are also supported by recent research among Facebook profiles and privacy management practices. So it sort of makes some sense when we think about gender norms. Maybe women want to make sure they convey what they want to convey in the way that they want to, and men want to be perceived in certain ways. There's so much stereotypical stuff when it comes to all that type of stuff, but that's sort of what they say. So gender, this is not something that's been studied a lot, but it is a very important thing to think about. So this is sort of the first sub-area of trying to apply CMP to disclosure online. And so that first sort of sub-area was influences of decision criteria and privacy disclosure choices. That second sort of sub-area is slide 13, and that is trying to think about influences of family on privacy orientations. And there's not a whole lot of information here, and it seemed to be a little bit contradictory as I read through this. Basically, the general argument is, and this is on top of page 28, families have different privacy orientations, right? So you basically are socialized in lots of different ways through your family, and you learn about issues of privacy through your family. And it talks about how there are sort of different orientations. Sometimes families are very sort of don't disclose too much. Some families are wide open. So the big point is that oftentimes we learn about the very idea of privacy, what to disclose and what not to disclose through our upbringing. But even as there is what they call de-individuation, as we sort of grow up and sort of get away from our family, we sort of create our own senses of privacy. But family orientation seems to make a difference. Except for blogging, apparently. On the bottom of page 28, basically it said it was the opposite. With the concept of family privacy orientation in mind, Child, again, our co-author here, examined whether parental socialization about privacy orientations was related to the way that bloggers manage their privacy on their blogs. Interestingly, the findings suggest that families advocating a more open orientation did not result in the young adults applying the family's values to their choices about information access and their blogging rules. Furthermore, when the family privacy orientation advocated being more closed about information to outsiders, the young adult blogging choices regarding privacy management practices also did not match the family's orientation. Therefore, family privacy orientations do not seem to carry over to the decision-making processes occurring on blogs by young adults. But then he doesn't go on to try to explain that. It sort of makes sense, though. I mean, if you grew up in a family that was very sort of tight-lipped, everything was private, and maybe you long to get more information out there. If you grew up in a family where everything is open, it's like, I want to bring stuff in a little bit. So it does make some sort of sense. And then, the next thing, I'm in my 40s and I still live with my parents. I do not live with my parents. But it talks about how the research about issues of privacy for children or young adults that do indeed live with their parents. And basically, that situation does not impact privacy decisions because the research says that 94% of children or adults living with their parents don't think their parents are looking at the stuff. So it does not impact their privacy decisions, which might be very naive on their part. He doesn't go into specifics, but it's pretty interesting. 14, slide 14, the influence of context. So basically, we're going to disclose or give private information differently depending on what our goals are online. Online banking is going to be different than trying to seek some sort of advice or disclosing some sort of personal health information on like WebMD or something like that, or all these health chat rooms or something like that where people say, oh, I got my brain is in my knee, what's going on? And then they get tons of random people from all over the world giving them terrible advice. So it all sort of depends on the situation. One of the things that I would found sort of interesting was their comment on e-commerce, which is just obviously buying stuff online, that I didn't quite get, because they said that you can falsify information. A lot of people do withhold private information or falsify information. And if you're buying stuff online, I don't know how you can't not give like credit card information. I mean, I never give Social Security stuff, but if I'm buying a book on Amazon or something like that, I can't falsify that. That's like illegal, I think. But a lot of folks do sort of falsify and withhold private information, and that seems to be one of the ways people deal with privacy. They lie. Okay. And also, one of the things that the book talks about is how Facebook has changed and added privacy things, and Facebook is crazy. There's lots of, I would encourage you, if you're on Facebook, to look at all your privacy settings and what you're doing, because some people don't even think about it. But you have a lot of control over who can see your stuff on Facebook and what you can do with stuff. Even though, I don't know if you saw the news, but they apparently were doing some sort of experiment and not disclosing that they were doing said experiment, and then they weren't apologizing for it. So, what you going to do? They're all in it to make money. And then there's some information about face-to-face disclosure versus Facebook. And this research, I think, is really quite important. That's why I say it is important. In the middle of page 30, I think there's some really important information that you might want to highlight in your book. And this is from, I don't know if I can pronounce that correctly, Christophides, maybe it's Greek, I don't know. basically comparing face-to-face disclosure with Facebook's disclosure. Consequently, this research underscores that individuals tend to be more likely to reveal information on Facebook than in their face-to-face relationships. Yet, a stronger individual predictor of Facebook disclosure practices tends to be how people disclose relationally when they are face-to-face. In other words, their privacy rules are set on the same wavelength, using the same criteria for both Facebook and face-to-face interactions. However, the amount of information they tell is mediated by the medium that is used. Possibly in face-to-face interactions, the disclosure receives immediate feedback and adjusts the amount depending on the reactions of the receivers. Whereas in the Facebook interactions, the feedback is in writing and lags behind an already constructed message. The research also found the need for popularity has some impact on Facebook disclosure practices. So basically, people tend to say more stuff about themselves on Facebook than they do in person, which makes some sense. It's also the anonymity of it, the embodiment, and all that type of stuff. But and also just in face-to-face, it could be immediate feedback. But when a person is not there, sometimes it's easier to disclose certain things. But I think that's a really, really interesting finding. Particularly because self-disclosure is so important in relationships, and also can be very, very dangerous depending on the situation. And also on the top page 31, they're again talking specifically about Facebook, and they say that when we do all our controls, our privacy controls, we tend to enact controls like our friends do. So if we have friends that I don't only allow certain people to see that you talk about, I guess, and you tend to enact the same sort of privacy controls, which I think is really, really interesting as well. So that's the influence of context. The next little subcategory is the camouflage as privacy protection. They don't say too much about this, except that we could use coded names, coded language, be ambiguous. What I've given you here, because I'm being a little bit long-winded here, I'm almost at an hour, although I'm sure you're watching, it goes by like that. Electronic Frontier Foundation is a very cool organization, and I have a link there for the 12 top ways to protect your own online privacy. So take a look at that, because it's partly talking about camouflage, but there's more stuff going on there. So again, what they try to do here, or what the authors try to do here, is apply this larger idea of communication privacy management to the criteria that we use to disclose information. They think about the influence of family on our privacy orientations. They think about the influence of context, and they think about the processes of camouflage as privacy protection. And then that's pretty much the chapter, except the whole future, there's more research to be done, which I think is really pretty interesting, because one of their areas is boundary crossing, which is huge. It is so important because CMC has allowed us in ways never before to cross boundaries that we did not used to cross. And it can be good, it can be bad, it all sort of depends. Of course, we live in a fairly, our society is becoming, I think, less formal. And oftentimes crossing boundaries and not having boundaries also beats back some of the hegemony of hierarchy in the first place. But you got to be careful, because I let students be friends with me on Facebook and stuff like that. But there's always they talk about physicians in there, and what happens? What if your doctor was on Facebook and you constantly